Everyone keeps saying the housing market is about to crash. They've been saying that for literal years at this point. So is 2026 finally the year it breaks? Look, here's the thing. The real problem isn't that people don't have the answers. It's that they're asking the wrong question. Because asking, is the market going to crash, sounds smart, but it's actually not that useful when you're deciding where and how you're going to live your life. Before we go any further, I want to be really clear about my role here because I feel housing advice could get messy when motivation isn't named. My name is Chris Rainwaters. I'm your favorite real estate witch, and I'm a licensed realtor, which means I do earn commission when someone buys or sells a home and hires me to assist them in that goal. But I don't... And that's Chico. He interrupts a lot. So yeah. Anyway, but I don't benefit as an empathic human being from pushing someone who is now a part of my community into a rushed or misaligned decision. I don't ever feel good about that, and so I refuse to operate that way. My goal with this video is to reveal the system that you're making a decision inside of. So whatever you do choose, it's intentional and something that you can live with long term. A lot of the real estate content you've been seeing recently is focused on one idea, that the housing market has to crash because prices are too high, too disconnected from incomes, too painful to be sustainable. And I understand why people think that. Historically, when something became this unaffordable, it did eventually break. Prices fell, markets reset, access returned. But here's the part that usually gets missed. After 2008, housing stopped being treated primarily as shelter and started being treated as systemically important collateral. Homes didn't just represent a place to live anymore. They became embedded across multiple systems, bank balance sheets, mortgage-backed securities, bond market, municipal budgets funded by property taxes, cock-a-doodle-doo, consumer confidence and spending. Because of that, the incentive structure changed. Governments and central banks aren't sitting around trying to make housing unaffordable, okay? But they are prioritizing preventing sharp price drops because in a debt-based system, rapid deflation destabilizes everything. The unaffordability is a side effect that they've chosen to tolerate, not the goal. So in a debt-based system, deflation is destabilizing. When prices fall quickly, asset values drop, debt becomes harder to service, defaults rise, credit tightens, confidence collapses. So instead of allowing prices to fully reset the way they did in earlier cycles, policy over the last decade has been far more focused on price stability and preventing sudden declines.
Existing housing, people that own their homes, we're going to keep them wealthy. We're going to keep those prices up. We're not going to destroy the value of their homes so that somebody that didn't work very hard can buy a home. I want to protect the people that for the first time in their lives feel good about themselves. They feel like they've, that they're wealthy people. There's so much talk about, oh, we're going to drive housing prices down. I don't want to drive housing prices down. I want to drive housing prices up.
And look, this isn't about Trump specifically, although I don't hide how I feel about him. This is what every administration says when they talk about housing policy, because nobody wants to be the one who crashed property values. It's not a conspiracy, it's an incentive structure. And this is why 2008 is such a bad comparison, because 2008 was a credit collapse. Loans were fragile, rates were adjustable, leverage was extreme, and when the system cracked, people were forced to sell. Today looks very different. So what we're seeing now is more like a frozen market. A lot of people who own homes aren't selling, and it's not because they don't necessarily want to not sell. It's because they can't afford to move. Most homeowners have fixed rate mortgages. Many are sitting on payments they'll never willingly give up. Selling is often optional, not forced. So instead of a dramatic crash, what we see is something quieter. Fewer homes selling, affordability worsening, mobility shrinking, the pressure concentrating on first-time buyers and people who need to move. And this is the key distinction most crash conversations miss. Housing can become unaffordable in two different ways: through a crash that lowers prices but restricts access to credit, or through price stability that keeps prices high and prevents a reset. Either way, the people who struggle most are the ones without leverage, liquidity, or flexibility, which is why asking, is the market gonna crash, can actually keep people stuck in the wrong frame. Because the risk for many buyers today isn't just what prices do, it's when and how they'll be able to act. This is where things really start to click for people, and also where a lot of confusion comes from. So when we say homes are too expensive, we're usually measuring that in dollars, but the dollar itself has been steadily losing purchase power. So when asset prices go up, that doesn't automatically mean the asset became more valuable in real terms. Sometimes it means the unit we're measuring with became weaker. Here's a simple way to think about it. If you measured your height every year, but the ruler kept getting shorter, you'd look like you were growing, even if you stayed the exact same size. Kind of like shrinkflation in a way, right? Anyway, that's what happens when money changes. And it's not just the price of homes, it's the measuring stick. So this is where people sometimes use gold as a comparison, not because anyone is actually buying houses with gold, but because gold gives us a relatively stable measuring unit over long periods of time. And when you look at housing prices that way, pricing the same homes in gold instead of dollars, something interesting happens. Homes don't look like they've exploded in value the same way they do in dollars. In many cases, they look relatively flat over long stretches of time. So the house didn't magically triple in real value, the measuring unit changed. Now, I'm not saying that this means buy gold or that gold is the answer to housing. I'm saying this: when money changes, prices behave differently. And this is where waiting gets tricky. So if you're waiting for prices to feel sane again in dollar terms, you're assuming the dollar will regain its old purchasing power. And that may happen, but it also may not. And what's far more common historically is this: prices don't come down much. Money just keeps changing. So homes don't suddenly feel affordable again. People simply adapt downward with smaller homes, longer terms, more people per household, more help from family, longer commutes, buying with a parent or a sibling. This isn't a prediction, it's just an observation. And why focusing only on price without looking at money can quietly keep people waiting for a moment that never will arrive. This is the part that most headlines completely miss. High prices don't actually require a flood of eager buyers. They require no forced sellers. That's the key distinction. In past housing downturns, prices fell because people had to sell. They lost jobs, their loans reset, their payments exploded, credit collapsed, supply surged all at once, and prices reset. That's not exactly what's happening now. Right now, we have a market where a huge percentage of owners are insulated from pressure. People locked into sub 3%, or I'd even say sub 5% mortgages, long-term fixed rate debt, owners who simply refuse to sell, investors holding rentals instead of listing, people who move but keep their old home and just rent it out, and very little new supply coming online in places where people actually want to live. I mean, it's February, you guys. Who doesn't want to live in this? So even though affordability is getting worse, even though buyers are struggling, even though fewer people can qualify, most sellers are optional sellers. They don't need to list. They're not being forced out by their loan, and they're not willing to trade a low payment for a much higher one. So what happens instead? Transaction volume drops, fewer homes sell, fewer people move, mobility shrinks. But because supply never floods the market, prices don't reset in the way people expect. Instead, pressure builds quietly. Affordability worsens. First-time buyers get squeezed. Families outgrow their homes but can't move. Renters feel stuck paying more every year. And yet, when you look at prices, they appear stubbornly high. That is how you end up with a market that feels completely broken without the dramatic collapse that everyone keeps predicting. And it's not because prices reflect health, but because the system absorbs stress by limiting access instead of lowering cost. So what does this mean for you? Well, if you're waiting for a flood of inventory to bring prices down, you're waiting for something that usually requires mass financial distress. And that could very well happen, but betting your housing plan on it is risky. If you want perspective, you don't even have to speculate. You can just look at other countries. Canada, Australia, the UK, higher price to income ratios than we have here, smaller homes, longer mortgage terms, more multi-generational living. P.S. If you want to look into multi-generational living and you think maybe it could be your next logical step for your life, I will link a video that I made that'll help you with that in the description. Okay, so there's an uncomfortable truth in all of this. There is no natural affordability ceiling. Housing can keep getting harder to access without anything breaking. And so that doesn't mean it will, but assuming that it can't is risky. This system doesn't hurt everyone in the same way. And that's why housing conversations feel so emotionally charged right now. People are having completely different experiences inside the exact same market. People under the most pressure tend to be first-time buyers without family help, growing families stuck in homes that no longer fit, people who need to move for work, health, or life reasons, divorce. I have a video on that too. And renters dealing with rising costs and no fixed horizon. For them, the market feels urgent. It feels unfair. It feels like the door keeps moving farther away. On the other hand, people who already own have fixed rate debt and don't need to move. They're not immune to stress or rising costs, of course, but they're far more insulated from sudden change. And this is actually why you hear the phrase K-shaped economy getting thrown around. It just means different groups are moving in different directions at the same time. Some people feel squeezed and stuck, and others feel relatively stable or even fine. So when one person says, this is impossible, and another says, I don't see what the big deal is, they're often both telling the truth, but from very different positions. Naming that difference matters because it explains why one-size-fits-all housing advice keeps missing the mark. Here's the part that almost never gets talked about. Buying a home isn't just a financial decision. It's a decision about belonging. When you buy a home, you're not just purchasing shelter. You're opting into a place. You're saying, I'm here, I'm staying, I'm participating, and that matters because your property taxes don't just disappear into some abstract void. They fund real local things: schools, libraries, roads, fire protection, community services. Homeownership ties you directly into how a place is shaped and cared for. And over time, homeowners tend to show up differently in local decisions. And it's not because they're better people or anything, it's because they're structurally invested. They've got skin in the game. Research shows that homeowners vote in local elections at higher rates and attend more community meetings. It's because they're structurally tied to the outcomes. When decisions affect your property taxes, your schools, your neighborhood infrastructure, you pay attention differently. They're living with the long-term consequences, whether they're good or bad. Stability creates voice. That doesn't make renting wrong by any means. Renting can be smart, necessary, and completely appropriate in many seasons of life and some lifestyles. But buying isn't just about appreciation or winning the market. It's about choosing stability over constant uncertainty, participation over transience, stewardship over speculation. And when you're thinking long-term about family, community, and the life that you're actually building, that distinction matters. So let's actually answer the question without forcing a yes or a no. A better question is this: is 2026 a good time for you to lock in housing stability? Because this decision isn't about beating the market. It's about choosing the kind of stability or flexibility that your life actually needs right now. Buying may make sense if you plan to stay put for a while. You can afford the payment without holding your breath. You're buying shelter, not just trying to time a perfect moment. And you value control over rent increases and forced moves. In that case, buying isn't a bet. It's a choice for stability. Waiting may make sense if you expect to move in the near future. You'd be stretching financially just to make it work. You genuinely need flexibility right now. Or you feel like you need the market to crash in order to feel comfortable buying. Because if it does, you're worried that you won't love your home still if it's worth less than what you owe for a bit while you wait for the market to recover. And here's the important part. None of those answers are moral. None of them means that you're smart or foolish. They're situational. The mistake isn't choosing one path over the other. The mistake is making a long-term decision based on short-term fear or waiting forever for a certainty that never actually arrives. Here's the part I really want people to hear. The biggest risk right now isn't buying at the wrong time. It's being forced to make a housing decision later, under worse conditions with fewer options than you have today. That's what actually gets people stuck. Not thoughtful action, not choosing stability, not even choosing to wait intentionally. What gets people stuck is delayed action under pressure, when rent keeps rising, when life changes force a move, when inventory tightens, when choices narrow, and suddenly a decision you could have made calmly has to be made reactively. That's not about predicting the market. That's about understanding how pressure works. There are a lot of people right now asking hard questions about money, housing, and where all of this is going. And honestly, I'm glad that those conversations are happening. What I focus on is helping people understand how those big forces show up in the actual decisions that they have to make in their own lives. If you're thinking about buying in 2026 and want to talk through your specific situation, that's literally what I do. You can schedule a consultation with me using the link in the description. If this way of looking at housing was helpful, the easiest way to stay connected is to like, subscribe, and of course, share this with someone who needs to know this stuff. I break this kind of stuff down regularly without any hype or fear and on multiple planes of existence. And if you're early in the process and just want some clarity, I have a bunch of free guides. They're all linked below. I have guides for selling, buying, first-time home buying, senior communities. That's what I have right now, but there are some more in the works. So depending on when you find this video, there could be even more goodies linked in the description. So check that out. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Wherever you land, I hope you find a place that supports and nourishes your life, your values, and the future that so many of us are longing for and actively working toward. I'll see you in the next one. Now, this is where, whoa, look at me. Getting too crazy over here, kicking over the camera. Ooh-wee. Okay,